Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today for this third session of our series of webinars on EU disclosures. Today, focusing on the Pillar 3 and Prudential Disclosures. We are continuing to receive people joining, but I think it's good that we start. So yes, maybe just brief, housekeeping rules is to say that this session, we will really take a look at Pillar 3 disclosure, but also into broader topics that may come up also in the discussions with the esteemed speakers. I would really like to ask everybody to please mute themselves if you're not speaking, also to turn off the camera so we can really see the speakers. I mean, I believe, unfortunately, Lucille is not able to put it, but not an issue. We're going to, for sure, enjoy a lot the intervention. And just to say that this is UNEP 5 members only session. It's being recorded. And just to indicate that we're going to have a panel discussion with the speakers after I introduce everybody, and then a Q&A with, again, the speakers. And I would like to ask everybody if you have questions that pop up in your mind during the discussion, to please post them in the chat. So that way, if during the discussion somebody sees a question that would like already to tackle, they can do so. Otherwise, and you want to raise your hand at the end when we have the Q&A session, you can also do that. But it's good if you write it, and then we can call you, or if we see that it's there, we can weave it into the discussion. Okay, so with that out of the way, I think it would be great to just say who we have around the table. So we count today with Rafael Poignet, so the senior team lead Systemic International Banks at the European Central Bank. We also count with Pilar Gutierrez, the head of reporting. Okay. And Transparency Unit of the European Banking Authority. Francesca, if you could please mute, that would be great. Okay, wait. Then I will, yeah. Lucille de la Jonquière, so Director of Group Public Affairs at Société Générale. Pilar, Head of Reporting and Transparency Unit at the EBA. And Paolo Marietti, Head of Credit Risk Strategies Monitoring and Controls at UniCredit. So, without further ado, I mean, I would like just to say a few words that, more than a year, that the EBA has finished the implementing technical standards on the Prudential Disclosures on ESG risks, Pillar 3 disclosures, and they were approved in the end of 2022 by the Commission. So they're applicable, and we have seen already some banks reporting on those disclosures. We really wanted to understand a bit, where are we in terms of ESG risks? Like the approach of the EU has been quite comprehensive. It's going into double materiality issues. It's going beyond, let's say, just the physical climate risk, the outside in perspective, but also the inside out perspective into what are the exposures that the banks are having in terms of the climate impacts, as well as environmental impacts and other elements. And these are key standards for credit institutions that really are working forward in terms of really engaging what can be the next steps. So we have different templates that really cover the whole spectrum of characteristics of risks, and that really go beyond, let's say, the usual, or let's say, approaches that we have seen in other places. We have a template that looks into the alignment metrics with the IEA scenarios. There's many elements that go beyond, let's say, the classic approaches, but they are really showcasing what is a modern approach in terms of risk management to these elements. So these are very promising. We are seeing the information coming up, but also the information need that is coming from the exposures, because of course the risk of the institutions is based on the exposures that they have, and also trying to understand a bit more, how business models may change, how target setting approaches may be impacted and influenced as well by the reporting. So I think that would be very, very relevant. Okay, so I would like to just start probably asking a question to everybody. And thank you very much again for your time and for being here today with us. So just I wanted to have 1 minute from each of the speakers to understand what do you think are the key challenges in addressing ESG risks in financial institutions nowadays, and how can disclosures and broader elements of the prudential framework help to bridge or to start bridging this gap. Maybe Pilar.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and good morning to all. So indeed, we have been more than 1 year since we published our final draft technical standards. They have been adopted, and we have seen large banks with trading instruments included this very relevant information in their Pillar 3 reports. I think that the main challenges for banks' risk management and also risk disclosures keeps being data availability. We also see that the banks are having to set up methodologies, process, getting expertise, skills and knowledge on a topic that is still relatively new. How do we think that these Pillar 3 disclosures, the obligation, these mandatory templates, for the first time, banks are having to publish mandatory information on a harmonized way? How do we see this is helping banks in their process? So the obligation to disclose this very relevant information is pushing banks to find the way to get the data, to get the skills and expertise. They are discussing together, and they are trying to find a way to put together this very relevant information. So we think that the fact that they are having to disclose this mandatory information is pushing banks to find the ways to get the data, to define the methodologies, to define the processes, and to define a common way to address all these challenges. Of course, these discussions were taking place beforehand, but now that they have the obligation, and they have the obligation to do it in a harmonized way, we are seeing that they are pushing together in the same direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pilar. Maybe Paulo.
Okay, if I may, let's say, Paolo Marietti has discussed UniCredit. Let's say we had this first, let's say, issuing of Pillar 3 disclosure this year. Let's say more will come in the next months. Say this, I'm quite on the same line of Pilar on the answer. I think that still the great challenge for climate risk is a bit the quantification of the risk at the end in some way, both in terms of data and common methodologies. And this is connected, I would say, also on the decision making, no? Because sometimes within the bank we have to take credit decision mainly where there could be trade-off between commercial, climate, and potentially also social targets. No? So these, let's say, are not easy decision, and the fact that we have constraints on quantification, let's say, is always a problem on this when we go to the specific decision. I think that in this, let's say, for sure, the Pillar 3, but also other disclosure. I think also to the, let's say, voluntary disclosure related to net zero, for example, are setting a common ground, making also, let's say, the quantification and all this strategy more transparent, and are helping, let's say, the banking sector to go in the same direction in also in taking this decision.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paulo. I think that's a very key element. Maybe Rafael, please.
Yes, obviously very good points made by the colleagues. I would maybe start just to remind as a caveat that of course ESG risk is good as a whole. We like to distinguish a bit between climate and the rest, climate, environmental, social, and governance. So if I focus mostly on climate, which the ECB has been doing over the past years, what we have observed is, I mean, banks we have to be clear, they have made a lot of progress over the past 3 years since we have started working on climate risk. But what we have observed still is that they still need more sophisticated methodologies, and granular information goes a bit, in the direction of what Paulo and Pilar were saying in terms of need to develop methodologies and data. So this is certainly something we observe. I would maybe just add that something where we still see significant blind spots is in terms of the underestimation of the risk. So when the banks do the make an assessment of the materiality of physical and transition risk, we still see a bit of significant shortcomings there, and we also see that the banks are working on that, and we should expect some improvements in the coming months. As for the link with disclosures and management of climate risks in general, it's always good to remind that also a bit in the spirit of Pillar 3, transparency of the risk profile. As regards climate risk and also their tangible efforts by the banks, to align their portfolio is actually extremely useful for the market really participants to start comparing banks and their risk profiles on a sound basis, which was unfortunately not always the case until recently. And obviously, we also hope at the ECB that the new Pillar 3 standards will help with that comparability.
Yep. Thank you, Rafael. And last but not least, Lucille, please. Lucille, are you there? Yeah, I see. Lucille, are you just joining, or? Yeah, I saw that there were some issues. Okay, so maybe we can start with the discussion, and I can assume that some of the points would have already been echoed, and from the credit institution side, some of the elements are, of course, quite common there. So, Lucille, are you with us now?
Hi, Daniel. Sorry.
Yes. Okay.
And good morning, everybody, and sorry for this connection issue. So what I can testify on my side for Société Générale, after the publication of our first ESG risk Pillar 3 report in March, that clearly it was a result of a high resources consuming work. And as Pilar already mentioned, the burden was actually exacerbated with the now quite well-known critical data collection challenge. And I think everybody around the table is perfectly aware that one of the reasons for such challenge is the calendar mismatch between the application date of bank sustainability disclosures obligations. So not only for ESG risk Pillar 3, but it's also the case for SFDR and so on. So this mismatch with the CSRD applications. And as you all know, we are entirely dependent on reliable corporate clients' data to perform our disclosures on sustainability, impacts, risks, and opportunities of our financing to all corporate clients. And in the meantime, by the CSRD application, and we know it's phased in, and also we heard that the sector-specific standards of EFRAG will probably not apply before a couple of years after the application date of CSRD. So in the meantime, the possibility that EBA granted us in the ITS to use proxies and estimates is generating other challenges related to methodologies, as Paolo mentioned, but also legal risks and comparability issues. And it's probably where we are the most concerned. It's on the comparability aspects, and I'll be very happy to develop those in this session.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. And I think, here we have heard already very relevant points that we're going to explore more in depth. But indeed, I think this also reflects the key importance of let's say, the sustainable finance as a problem of asymmetric information. And I think disclosures can really help to solve this problem and to make sure that, we are really looking into the key issues that are popping up. I think it's important now to turn our view to the EBA and try to understand, what have been the key issues that are popping up now in terms of, for example, the roadmap that the EBA has released with the key elements in terms of the next steps. Also to try to understand from Pilar, what are the key elements on the Pillar 3 ITS on ESG risks, the implementation, the next regulatory steps, and how do you see these elements really helping to solve these challenges? This challenge in terms of information that needs to come from the corporates that then the banks can use for their own reporting. But of course, it really needs to be clearly integrated in a way that is useful, and then comparable. So there's a comparability on the client side and then on the banking side that needs to be solved. And I think this point of comparability also Rafael was looking at it. So, Pilar, please, if you could give us a brief overview of these key issues in terms of the roadmap, the Pillar 3 disclosures, where you see the preparation issues, maybe touch a bit on the timeline. Yeah, over to you.
So, on the roadmap, well, in December last year, we published our updated roadmap on sustainable finance and ESG risks, following the new mandates received from the Commission. Some of them will come from the CRR3 implementation. In that roadmap, we have first task related to transparency and disclosures. Of course, continuing our work on risk management and supervision, integrating ESG factors and risks in management and supervision. In the past, we issued reports. Now we have to continue with this work. We continue our work on the prudential treatment of exposures in order to identify the areas for possible enhancements and capture better environmental and social risks on a risk-based approach. The stress testing, where we have the mandate to embed ESG risks gradually in our stress tests. In March, we received also a letter from the Commission to do, together with ECB, this stress test, short-term stress test exercise on climate. The work on standards and labels in order to have common definitions and methodologies to identify sustainable banking products, greenwashing, monitoring of ESG risk, and supervisory reporting. I will focus on the transparency and disclosure mandate and on the supervisory reporting mandates and on the challenges on Pillar 3 and how we are working together with banks and also with other institutions to address these problems. On Pillar 3, as said before, we saw we have seen now the first Pillar 3 disclosures by large banks with traded instruments in the EU. We have seen, I mean, we are happy with the outcome of the exercise, while understanding that some disclosures are still, I mean, this is something that we always said from the beginning. The first disclosures would be on a best effort basis, and we hope that gradually these disclosures will improve. But we have received good feedback from analysts saying that at least we have now comparable information. They appreciate a lot the information on disclosures by sectors. Some analysts appreciate very much this piece of information that we have on exposures towards corporates excluded from climate benchmarks, because they see that these are really the exposures to corporates that are very carbon intensive. We appreciate that there are some challenges, particularly on some templates, the real estate, the mortgage portfolio template, where we ask for the split by energy efficiency of the underlying assets. I think that banks are having great challenges to get this information. They don't have it. We encourage here banks to use the bilateral contact with counterparties. This is key to have this information, and we think that the new directive on energy efficiency will help to improve this data availability. We also appreciate challenges on the template on physical risk. We have received comments or questions on methodologies, scenarios to use, and we always come back with the same response. So please use what you have and explain what you are having. We are trying to support banks in the process with Q&As, the question and answer process. I think that we have published around 30 Q&As since the end of 2022, and hope that this is helping banks in the process. We encourage banks to submit questions when they have an issue in understanding the technical standards. And then on the evolution of this work and the roadmap, we know that the CRR3 proposal includes mandates for us to extend the pillar for banks, all banks to disclose information on ESG risk. Now it's focused on large banks. All banks will have to disclose this information, and for us to extend the technical standard to all banks. And this is what we will do in the CRR3 implementation, taking into account always proportionality. I don't know whether you are listening me, because I have some issues now with.
Yes, we do. We just cannot see you, but it's fine.
Okay.
We hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, so we will keep working. So we will, as part of our CRR3 implementation, we will work on extending the technical standard on Pillar 3 to all banks. The same CRR3 includes the requirement for banks to report also ESG information to their competent authorities and for us to implement these reporting requirements. And this is something that we will do also in the context of the CRR3 implementation, of course, once the trilogue on CRR3 is closed and it's clear, stable, and we have a clear and stable version. In between, while this mandate on supervisory reporting is implemented, I mean, we, the EBA and the competent authorities, we also need to receive data. I mean, it's very good that banks are disclosing this data, but we need to receive this data also for, in the case of the supervisory, the competent authorities for the supervisory purpose. In the case of the EBA, to comply with other mandates, we need to develop a monitoring system for ESG risks, and we need data for developing this. So in order to bridge the gap between now and the moment that we will start receiving data as part of the ITS, the technical standard supervisory reporting, we are planning to launch an ad hoc data collection where we will request large banks with trading instruments, those banks that are already disclosing Pillar 3 information, to submit this information to us as well. And we will soon publish more information on this ad hoc data collection that we plan to launch with data for the end of 2023 and collect it in 2024. In parallel, we are also working with other organizations. We are very involved in the EFRAG work. We worked with EFRAG and all EFRAG members in order to have in the interoperability with the EFRAG standards. In the first set of sector agnostic standards, we underscore the need to include information that banks need for their Pillar 3 disclosures. And we were very happy with the standards that were submitted to the Commission, as some key data points were included in these standards. We are also working with the Basel Committee. The Basel Committee plans to issue standards on Pillar 3, a consultative document, and also the final standards. So we are working with them also to have harmonized, so to ensure that the Basel standards are harmonized with our standards. Usually it's the other way around. In this case, we were first. So we are trying to ensure that there is consistency between the standards. And then we are working, as I said, with banks through Q&As. We are meeting banks to understand their issues. I mentioned some of them: the real estate template, geographical split of physical risk. Now they are working on implementation alignment metrics templates, although some of the banks have already implemented them. So we are working through the Q&As, but also in meetings with banks to try to address all these issues and support them in the process of the disclosure and also in this roadmap that we have in front of us, focusing in my case in Pillar 3 and reporting. And this is all from my side, Daniel.
No, thank you very much. Very, very relevant points, and I think really highlighting some of the key challenges that we're seeing. And now I would like to turn to Rafael, from the ECB perspective. I think it would be relevant to understand a bit more on the ECB's approach to the climate-related risk and climate and environmental-related risks, the expectations for banks to disclose such risks, and a bit of the observations that you have already probably made in terms of the disclosures of the banks that you supervise. And also, if you could give us a current state of play. I mean, I know the ECB has published quite recently a report specifically on these issues, and just to understand a bit more, how is the perspective from your side? I think that would be highly relevant for the audience.
Thanks a lot, Daniel, and also thanks, Pilar, for all the very good points that you made. It's important to remind that obviously the banks are not starting from scratch in terms of climate disclosures in 2023, and obviously it's been many years that some of them at least have started publishing some information on that matter. In November 2020, maybe some of you are aware. I think I've seen some bank representative in there, so I hope they are aware. We have published an ECB guide on the management and disclosure of climate risk, and in there we have an expectation 13 that builds, so to say, on the CR2 Pillar 3 requirements, and to expect the banks to disclose meaningful information on material climate risk, so physical and transition risk. What does it mean concretely? It means that we have in that expectation and sub-expectations an expectation to make considerations about the materiality. I'll come back to this again, but I think it's important about the materiality of physical and transition risk in the short, medium, and long term, and also the disclosure of meaningful KPIs and especially KRIs in those disclosures, including also finance emissions. And also a very important sub-expectation that we have there is related to the substantiation of those disclosures. And I think I will come back to it in a minute, because I think that was an important finding that we like to follow up on. We've been monitoring the application of the ECB guides on climate risk. So, I mean, first, overall, because there not only expectation, there's one expectation on disclosures, but there are 12 others. Sorry, yeah, thanks. There are 12 others on many different aspects: governance, business model, credit risks, etc. Some of you might already be aware of the 2022 thematic review, ECB thematic review on climate risk. There was also a climate stress test in 2022 that we have been conducted. So basically working on the fundamentals, so to say, with the banks, and trying to really beef up with the banks, you know, the risk management processes related to the identification and management of climate risk. More specifically, now turning to the climate disclosures, we have been publishing 3 reports now. So latest, as mentioned by Daniel, was published end 2023. So obviously, if you have the chance, have a look. It's called The Importance of Being Transparent. And we have been also interacting with the banks, so via feedback letters, on the basis of our ECB guide and the expectation 13 that I have mentioned earlier. Obviously, in 2023, now that we have the Pillar 3 ITS on ESG risk, this will be now for the eligible banks, because we have, as a reminder, not all the significant institutions are eligible to the EBITS. We still have roughly, 20, 25 that are not eligible, but which are still have to be aligned with the ECB expectation 13. So I think this is important, but still we will also, of course, focus a bit on the application of the EBITS. This is planned for the second part of the year, so we will scrutinize, obviously, what has been done over the first month. So, of course, I cannot express myself on the quality of what has been disclosed, even though I have observed that many banks have already started disclosing some of the templates, if not all the templates, sometimes even some of those that were expected only for next year. I can share briefly a bit some of the observations on the disclosures of banks as of end 2022. So prior EBA ITS, if you wish, so solely on the basis of the ECB expectations is, and again, what we have observed is significant improvements of climate disclosures. Of course, in the discourse about climate disclosures, we tend to focus only on the G-SIBs and the very large banks. But let's not forget that the banking landscape in the EU is very sparse. You have very different types of banks, and it's also true that many smaller banks also were not really disclosing any kind of information. This has really improved, especially in that middle tier over the past 2 years, and this is something we have obviously noted. Just to give an example, we had in 2021 observed that not even 1/3 of the banks were making broad consideration on the materiality of climate risk. I think now in 2022, there was like more than 86% of the banks. So it's a significant improvement. When I mention, of course, consideration about materiality, it's very broadly said, but okay, at least there were some considerations about that. Quality is still insufficient from our perspective. You might remember I said a few minutes ago that we have sub expectations about the substantiation of those disclosures. This is particularly important, and this is unfortunately still missing across the boards, and that hinders a bit the comparability, you know, that is needed. Just to give a brief example, when we provides certain metrics like emissions, it's good, of course, to know what methodology is behind, what kind of percentage of the portfolio is covered, etc., etc. And this is kind of information that we expect to see more in the future. And then to conclude on a positive note, obviously something we have observed is what we did is we compared the disclosures of the EU GSIPs, so the 8 GSIPs we're supervising in the ECB, with the 22 international GSIPs, so from North America, Asia, etc., etc., and try to make an assessment, a theoretical assessment, if those other banks, you know, would be aligned or not with our ECB expectations. And what we have observed is obviously our 8 GSIPs, our supervised GSIPs were performing much better and disclosing much more information than their international peers, which was something obviously quite positive that we have noted. So as said, we will follow up in the coming months. Stay tuned. We will surely contact the banks again on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Rafael. I think that's indeed very interesting comments, and you're really rounding a bit more the perspective we heard from EBA and now from you. So now I would like to turn to the banks in the room. So maybe starting with Paulo, you know, I think it would be interesting from our side, you know, to understand a bit more what are the key challenges that banks are facing when implementing these ESG disclosure requirements under Pillar 3. I think, you know, some of the issues have already been covered, but we really like to listen from that perspective.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Let's say, first of all, I'm happy about what, let's say, Rafael just mentioned about the fact that the European GSIB performed better, let's say, than the other international GSIBs. So we are happy about that. Say this, let's say, I think that in any case, it was not an easy exercise also for the European GSIBs, because in any case, for the Pillar 3 disclosure, we had to manage several challenges. I would say that, so I could bring our UniCredit experience. Let's say, I would say that the first challenge was a bit also the fact that for sure the metrics were not totally new, but at least there was not commonly shared within the bank. And so this, let's say, the sharing process also to be all on the same page, to agree what a different metric means, was in any case a bit more complex than with other, let's say, more agreed metrics. And I would say that another element of complexity this year was for sure the fact that still there was no available benchmarking. You know? So in the usual discussion, let's say, you always compare to the market, and on many of these metrics, this was the first time that I was quite shared the KPIs. So on these, let's say, for sure, let's say the first time is always a bit more complex than when we will repeat the exercise. On top of this, I would say that the data availability and data quality is always a key point of attention, mainly on some metrics. I think that, for example, the point mentioned about the pillar, about the APC is for sure a point. For us, in our experience, it was quite different to retrieve, let's say, granular energy performance certificates on our stock. And thanks to strategic partnership with external data provider, we are able to cover at least 20-30% of our portfolio. Let's say on the rest with proxy, but with granular data, at least this data. So for us, this was an important achievement. But I would say that also as a suggestion, I think that from a regulatory side, there should be, in my opinion, more initiatives to make this data also available. because in our UniCredit footprint, I think mainly to Italy, but also Germany and other geographies, it's not so easy to retrieve this. While this, in my opinion, if we really want to proceed Europe in this transition, it would be important that data would become public. I think also for further challenge related to net zero real estate, where these data are, for example, key data. Another challenge, I think, could be related, also mentioned by Pilar, about, let's say, still missing or just partially available methodology from the regulator and also available in the market. And here, I think, let's say, mainly probably to the physical risk part, to the physical risk template, and also to the top 20 polluters template. On this, I would say the difficulties, it was the fact that we had to define our own methodology and our own threshold to define what is a material physical risk, while of the top 20, let's say, there was no let's say, no clear indication about how to identify these top 20. And so, let's say, on this, our internal approach to mitigate this point was, first of all, for the physical risk, to have a great transparency on our methodology. So also in the direction what Rafael said, let's say, we try to be as transparent as possible about the events we thought it was relevant and the threshold that we defined. But for sure, this was in any case not fully comparable with other banks. While on the top 20, let's say, to avoid to be in some way seen, and here I come back also to the reputational risk and legal risk that it was mentioned before by Sogen. Let's say, I think we presented, let's say, our exposure following an internal developed list, but we also, let's say, in any case, provided our exposure that it was similar following public list. So let's say the Carbon Measure Database and the Climate Accountability Institute list, in the way to be really very transparent about our exposure towards top 20. Finally, I would say probably the final challenge was the fact that while some metrics are really used to steer our portfolio, so in some way are becoming a part of our DNA of our bank, some metrics were not really the case. So I mentioned, for example, the exclusion from Paris Agreement, the PAB, that we are not really using for the steering of portfolio. So this was a bit, in any case, a bit more complex in some way for us also to assess and to understand how to monitor going forward. But say this, let's say, I could just close and say that for sure it was an important exercise, a great achievement, I would say, in the direction of providing more transparency, but still due to this challenge and constraints, I still consider that data from Pillar 3 from the different banks are still not fully comparable among them. If you compare different data on some templates, mainly there could be difference values that, in my opinion, are not explained by different risk embedded in the portfolio.
Thank you, Paolo. I think that's a key point indeed, and I take note of the data elements, because I can imagine as well, for preparing the disclosures and all of these key issues, both on, green asset ratio and also the BTAR, that it may be more intensive if you really need to reach out to the companies to try to estimate what they are having. Okay.
Yes, let's say if I have just to provide a bit you just some insights on what we are doing going forward, not for the GAR and the BTAR. First of all, I would say we are continuing the same approach that we have used for the first delivery. So we have in some way set up a permanent working group at bank level, putting together all the relevant function of the bank. So we have risk management, but we have also CFO, ESG department, that is our structure responsible for the overall ESG strategy across the group, and also digital for IT and business for, in any case, to be all on the same page. Then I would say that we continue to leverage our, let's say, data and IT architecture. We have set up, let's say, a group architecture dedicated to let's say, to the, let's say, to manage this data and to integrate this in the different process. And this architecture has been set up both for the internal managerial monitoring, but also for the external regulatory monitoring. So this will allow, in any case, us to track these metrics along the time, and also being ready to understand how, let's say, we could expect that external disclosure will evolve, but at least we are making coherence about managerial regulatory KPI. So these, let's say, the two other areas where we are working are for sure still working a bit on the regulatory interpretation, still not fully clear for some aspect, and we are also leveraging the Q&A that were mentioned. For example, for us, let's say also there is still a bit of calendar mismatch, for example, on the request for the financial institution. So there is a section about the GAR for financial institution that still other financial institution will provide their Pillar 3 we will not able to fulfill, or potentially also some interpretation of flow and stock, but let's say just to mention some aspects that still for us are not fully clear. In parallel, said, we are, let's say, proceeding with our data strategy implementation. So we are working to collect, also leveraging external companies, and so making this more efficient, let's say, the corporate non-financial disclosure in the way to have all the data available. This will be a key enhancement for the GAR. Regarding the BITAR, I would say that for us, the key initiative that we have in place is the setup of a EU taxonomy aligned survey that we have set up to assess all our transactions, mainly obviously starting from large corporate, but also with the purpose to extend to all the corporate and to assess what is specialized lending. So not general financing, but all the specialized lending. This, let's say, for us was a huge investment because we had to make, let's say, to transform more than 400 pages of technical standards in something that could be really user-friendly, understood by the network. So for us, this was a huge effort to make something available and implementing. But we think this is an important investment because at the end, the only way to make all these elements in some way really usable and going in the direction and the expectation for the ECB is to align our network. So in some way, and then to have a consistent approach in the strategy, in the discussion with our clients. And also, let's say, for this, let's say, this tool will be very, very important. So if I could just complete on this topic regarding let's say, what we have discussed also before about the business, the knowledge building. What is really important from the disclosure is this knowledge building, and equally important also the knowledge sharing within the bank. So what we are also working is in this direction to set up tools to share also this knowledge, for example, at building at the industry level with our network, and to really follow what is also our risk appetite definition, going and supporting our clients in a fair transition. And so we are thinking and implementing tool, for example, to making all this information available to the network. So easy cockpit that could be used to understand the materiality of the risk, and then also to support the strategy towards this client.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paulo. I think that was very complete intervention. And what I wanted to do now, I mean, turning from one GSIB to the other in the room, probably more that are actually listening, is to also bring this, you know, we've been talking now a lot about the data, the challenges in terms of the regulation, where are the next steps. And now I just wanted to make sure, you know, because in the room, we have invited the European banking members of UNEP. So mainly PRB members, many of them also Net Zero Banking Alliance members, including both of the speakers from SocGen and UniCredit. And I think one of the key elements at UNEP, you know, we do use risk and alignment approaches as complementary ways to look into the future, into the ways that financial institutions can actually align and make sure that the transition happen. No, I think Paulo, you were talking now about this, and I think one of the elements that I would really like to cover, and Lucille, turning now to you, is, you know, we have seen a lot of work happening on the voluntary sphere, you know, with the Net Zero Banking Alliance also aligning in terms of the transition pathways, you know, how to really decarbonize portfolios. And I think now these templates also from the Pillar 3 are including very interesting information that can also complement or that could, you know, showcase a European way to reach some of the targets. You know, taxonomy disclosures on the one side, template 1 and template 3 from the Pillar 3 disclosures on the other. So, you know, looking at the misalignment metrics, you know, how to reach one with the other. I would really like if you could comment a bit on these connections. You know, how do you see the overall Pillar 3 framework, but with this angle in mind, that I think could be very useful for the audience.
Sure, Daniel, thanks. So Société Générale is, as you mentioned, one of the signatory member of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, as many EU GSIBs around the table. What it means being a member of NZBA is to engage, to align credit portfolio on trajectories compatible with the objective of carbon neutrality by 2050. And we are only covering exposures to the most carbon intensive sectors. And the sectors are agriculture, aluminium, cement, coal, commercial real estate, residential real estate, iron and steel, oil and gas, power generation, and transport. If we articulate this engagement with the EBA ITS requirement on the template 3, the ITS ESG plus 3 on template 3, we know that from June 2024, we'll have to report on our corporate loan portfolio alignment metrics and targets for our exposures on those sectors. And the sectors are pretty much the same between the NZBA sector and the EBA sectors. I'll do a shortcut. It is when I say EBA, is obviously the ITS on ESG plus 3 template 3. And I think we can welcome the consistencies that EBA, but also ECB, I know, contributed also to this template, seek to ensure with NZBA not to reinvent the wheel for banks. We also know that all the metrics that the EBA has indicated are indicative, as well as the NACE codes. They are here only to help define the sectors, but they are not mandatory. And we have still identified remaining differences between the NZBA approach and the template 3 on portfolio alignments. So it's basically on targets. For NZBA, we have to define a reference year and a 2030 target first, whereas the EBA is asking to indicate a year of reference and a 3 years target. So it's not so clear whether we'll have to define new targets every year, which could be quite burdensome. So that's one difference. And the other difference is that NZBA is not making specific climate scenarios mandatory, whereas EBA is. And what we noticed is that there is not necessarily a NZE 2050 scenario for all sectors that the EBA is indicating. So that's for the articulation. I also take the opportunity to maybe warn on the revision of the prudential framework. So current revision, it's on CR3 and CRD6, where the European Parliament is asking for banks to have a holistic approach when defining their transition plan compatible with a 1.5 degree trajectory, or at least carbon neutrality by 2050. And clearly, holistic could be a dangerous provision in this level 1 text. And we really ask for this requirement to be perfectly consistent with the NZBA approach for banks, and also with this template 3 of EBA. And as EBA should have the mandate to define the content of banks' transition plan, I'm quite confident, I'm quite comfortable that EBA will make sure that this consistency will be ensured. But first, clearly, it should not be specified in the level 1 text that banks should have a holistic approach covering all sectors and all clients and all financial services. We can only do transition plan on financing to corporate clients in the sectors that are the most carbon intensive and where climate scenario, credible climate scenario exists. So that's one point I really wanted to make today. And I will finish my intervention by also reminding that to facilitate our disclosure in this template 3 of the EBA ITS, but also to facilitate our meeting of the NZBA commitments, it is for us critical that EFRAG sector-specific standards incorporate for the relevant sectors the GHG emission intensity per production unit, which we call physical GHG emission intensity. Otherwise, we will continue to use proxies or to try to get the information on a bilateral basis with each corporate client, and it will really facilitate our work if at the end the corporates are required to disclose such information. So that's it on my side on the NZBA and transition plan topics.
No, thank you very much, Lucila. And I think this is a very comprehensive view of what we have seen until now. Because not only the Net Zero Banking Alliance, I mean also the PRB now has committed as well to updated the climate commitment to go to 1.5 degrees. The guidelines for climate target setting are the same. And just to highlight that, if I'm not mistaken, as well, in the report from the EBA from I believe 2 years ago, on the management of ESG risks, one of the approaches to do this is through portfolio alignment. It would be an active way to manage transition risk in the bank's portfolio, And the PRB was mentioned as one approach that that does this kind of portfolio alignment. And now that we also have Net Zero Banking Alliance that is pushing the boundaries of what is possible. I think these are the interconnections that we see popping up more between alignment, risk, regulation, voluntary approaches, and this kind of ambition plus the mandatory role of regulation. And I would like to now really let anybody comment from the panel. If you want to bring some topic, but really I would like to hear probably back from Pilar and from Rafael first. What do you think from what we heard right now? Maybe from Pilar first. What do you see coming up on the Pillar 3 and all of these key issues that could complement what we have seen in the market and the comments that we heard from Paolo on the data, the key challenges, and the client engagement, the reporting we need from clients also for the transition purposes.
Okay, from my side, well, I think it's very interesting what both Paolo and Lucille have explained. I think that this confirms what I mentioned at the beginning, that this technical standard have pushed banks a lot, and I think that they have pushed the banks in the right direction, because all these efforts that these two GCs have done to retrieve the data, I think that they are also helping them in the risk management process. I think on the point that raised by Paolo, for example, on the real estate issues, the availability of data, I mean, I think it's very good what you mentioned, that through this external provider, you have managed to cover up to 30% of your portfolio, which is a lot, because, I mean, considering the long term of the mortgages, I guess that many of these mortgages back date from long time ago, and that you are using proxies to cover the rest, which was precisely which we were seeking from banks. Okay, look at the data availability, cover with the data available as much as possible, and then try to use estimates, models, proxies for the rest. This is precisely that what we expected, and that should help banks also in their risk management. Paolo mentioned that they would appreciate some kind of public initiative to facilitate the data availability, and here we are confident that the directive on the energy efficiency precisely the directive on the energy performance of buildings directive should help to address these data challenges in the next few years. This directive includes initiative to have public databases and provide public access to these databases. We know that in certain member states we already have these databases, in others not. In some cases they are private, so this will facilitate a lot data availability for this template. We also understand what Lucille mentioned on the and also Paolo on the mismatches between the dates of different initiatives. But we have always highlighted, the bilateral contact with counterparties is key for risk management, and I don't think that the banks can wait until data is available through the CSRD to get this data, not for the Pillar 3 disclosure, for their management. On the template on the template on physical risk, what you mentioned, Paul, is precisely with what we think banks should do at this stage is explain what their models and what they are doing. And then we will see in the future whether there is room to issue some kind of guidance on scenarios and methodologies for this template. And on the alignment metrics, I think that we have had conversations with Lucille as well on this very relevant metric. Here I will leave also Rafael, because I know that the ECB is very keen on this template. But yes, indeed, I think here the focus is on those sectors that are relevant for the bank, those sectors where you are setting alignment metrics and where you are having the plans. I think that you mentioned that we are prescribing an scenario, while in other cases the scenario is not prescribed, which is the opposite of what we do in template 5. So where banks are asking us to prescribe the scenario, so we see that there are some differences. But what I take from what your interventions is the impression that I had at the beginning. We are far away from having perfect disclosures, but this is a key step in the right direction to have the data that you need for the disclosures, but very relevant for risk management, not most relevant, because as said by Rafael at the beginning, disclosures are key for market participants to understand what's going on. Transparency is always helped to foster market confidence. It's better that banks know that stakeholders know how banks are, or how far away or how close they are to have the information than not to know. So I think that this is the right direction. And I also like what you said, Rafael, that GCs in Europe are much, even if we know that there is room for improvements, are much better place in terms of disclosures than outside Europe. And I think, and I hope that all the effort that we are doing from the EBA, the ECB, and all the co-legislators are helping or supporting or promoting this right direction.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pilar. That was also very, very comprehensive. And I would like to turn then directly to Rafael as well. If you can share a bit of your views on this, or even any good practice that you have observed as well from the market that would be relevant also for the audience.
Yes, certainly. I mean, before, sorry, I stick to my supervisory hat for a few more seconds just to highlight two important caveats to what has been said. The first is obviously, yes, proxies can be used. And I mean, there is, in a few cases, as Lucille alluded to, no other choice. However, what we have observed as a really broad spectrum of proxies. This is something we will obviously monitor because proxy can mean everything and nothing, right? So we'd still expect with proxies a certain level of granularity and a bit of a soundness in terms of application of some methodologies for some of the metrics. So just to just to be a bit careful with the tolerance, so to say, with proxies, there is some, but to of course to a certain limit. The second thing is obviously I see. I mean there are questions about the template tree. Alignment is a very important topic. The EBITS was actually, we worked on it in the course of 2021, 2022. So in parallel with the work of GFANS. So we appreciate obviously that there might be some differences. As Pilar reminded, there's still a lot of leeway to say allowed for the banks in terms of choice of sector, choice of metrics, so to say, to allow like a maximum overlap in terms of metrics disclosed as part of net zero and ZBA and the one of EBATS. But I think an important reminder on that is, I mean, there's also a reason, why there is these templates. What we have observed across the board, and I think it's important to remind this, is in the disclosures of banks, there has been a lot of white noise, so to say, that's how we call it, about, how green they are, like how committed they are, etc. That noise not always really supported by facts and by metrics. That noise not necessarily in terms especially of alignment, not supported by the relevant metrics in the relevant sectors. So the idea was a bit to align a bit more and to set a baseline, so to say, in terms of what is expected from the banks before actually putting the name carbon neutral or whatever together in the disclosures. So I think that was important. So now, sorry, so now being a bit more positive than this, we sometimes manage to do that as well in the ECB, is we have observed some good practices by many banks, and by the way, not only by the GSIBs. I think it's important to remember. I mean, of course, we have reps from SocGen and UniCredit, but there are also like many much smaller banks in Europe that do manage to perform extremely well in terms of disclosure of relevant climate-related risk information. Not necessarily in the sense that a lot of disclosures, but well-targeted, well-substantiated disclosures. That goes also in terms of definition of what is a commitment to net zero, how is a certain alignment metric calculated, etc., etc. So this is also possible. Maybe just to go beyond alignment, because I mentioned it's an important topic, but in terms of materiality definition of climate risk, so really the risk side of it, we have seen actually much smaller banks providing very meaningful, visually meaningful information on really the exposure portfolio by portfolio, risk by risk, so meaning credit, market, liquidity, etc. Short term, medium term, long term, providing like a cartography, like a mapping of those risks, which was actually very meaningful, and as we observed, also in line with what they have internally, which is of course something that we expect. So to take these different elements into account, so I think way is still long to go, but we see still progress and already good practices.
Thank you very much, Rafael. And I think this also mirrors, let's say, at UNEP, we do have members that sign the PRB that are of different sizes, different types of capabilities, different types of exposures in their portfolios, and there's different ways in which they are also achieving these goals. No, so I think that is also relevant to say that it happens as well on the regulatory front. It happens as well in tackling these claims, as you were indicating, this white noise or greenwashing, if you can call it in a different way. No, I think the EBA is also with the other ESAs coming up with a paper on that. But indeed, so maybe now turning back to the banks, a bit not in response, but also in complement to what we have heard from Pilar and Rafael now. What do you see the key steps? What do you see that could be improved? Besides the more classic approaches in terms of the simplification of the framework, but also what could be helpful as an addition. We heard about the EPCs. We heard also about the reporting data from companies more integrated. But for example, we see that for BITAR, banks are also doing a lot of efforts in terms of getting the information from the SMEs or the non-EU exposure. So if we would like to comment on this, maybe Lucille, Paolo, whoever wants to come out.
I mean, I think we can here reiterate on the BITAR, the applicability issues we continue to have on the EU taxonomy, and in particular on the applicability of the do no significant harm criteria, in particular outside of the EU. But even for SMEs, because it really presents a certain administrative burden to have to verify and check and potentially have certificators testify that the activities of SMEs comply with DNSH, and it's outside of the EU. It's even more complicated. So when we say we can use proxies for green exposures outside of the EU on taxonomy alignments, once you have authorized that, it's quite complex to really to concretely apply what it can mean. And this is why, at Société Générale, we are calling for more coordination with non-EU competent authorities, and maybe try and define a sort of comparability tables on at least on the DNSH among jurisdiction. And I think this is what the platforms on sustainable finance would be planning to perform in the next couple of years, so as to make eligible exposures outside of the EU. And I'm notably thinking of emerging markets where transition financing and green financing is absolutely critical. So that's on the BITAR. There is also a very interesting template in the ITS about financing opportunities on climate mitigation, and I quite welcome the pragmatism of EBA in the fact that as the taxonomy is quite difficult to implement, it's key to open also opportunities to financing of transition or financing of green projects that are not necessarily complying with all the taxonomy's criteria. And then I think it really opened the floor to the definition of a transition finance framework that would, on the dedicated financing, incorporate what is emerging currently with the EU Net Zero, it's the Net Zero Industry Act and the US Inflation Reduction Act. They are providing a quite interesting and not totally complete, but at least a first interesting list of net zero technologies that could be good underlying of transition loans. That's on the dedicated loans. And on the non-dedicated financing, we are optimistic that the publication of transition plans by companies all over the world, there is one approach in the ISSB standard, one approach in the EFRAG ESRS so far. There is also discussion at the UK level on how UK companies will disclose transition plan, but those publications, even if there are differences, but those publications will really be very interesting tools and support for transition finance on our side. So that's the next steps which we see and which we think would be interesting to incorporate into the ESG risk Pillar 3 in the future, basically to really have a wider picture than what the taxonomy is offering.
Thank you, Lucille. I see the points, and I assume as well, the corporate sustainability due diligence directive is probably the rational next step in the EU package that is going to cover some of these issues. So now turning back to Paolo, and just to say, that it would be great if we can just have your intervention now, and then I will ask everybody to just conclude with short comments, and then we can pass to the Q&A. As I see, I see Pilar has answered already some questions, but maybe we can go to others. So Paolo, maybe from your side, if you have any further comments, maybe if you want to narrow down in any of these topic. So if you want to comment more
No,
on
I would say that my experience, I have to confirm, let's say, the points already made by Lucille. These for us are the key points. I would say mainly, let's say, also the discussion about the non-EU counterparts, for sure, very relevant. And I would again confirm the point about the alignment template, that, let's say, the fact that is not aligned to the net zero practice, in my opinion, brings several complexity that would be really appreciated if could be in some way reviewed in the direction of more alignment to net zero practice.
Okay, thank you. I think that was indeed concise, and I think that we really are now at a moment where we do see all of these different aspects popping up and really coordinating and making sure that everything is in line. It also takes a lot of work in terms of talking through the institution, you need to discuss with the compliance, risk, business, sustainability teams to really understand what is happening and to make sure that something is coordinated. So I just wanted to say, if you want to, please, maybe Paolo, we start with you. What would you like the audience to take out from the discussion, and then we go with the rest. Paolo, do you have any?
But let's say, I think that overall it was an interesting discussion about what are, let's say, the challenge that we have managed and we are managing. Let's say, from my side, it would be very important to still work in the next months together in some way still try to further proceed in the direction of simplified templates in some way, and to let's say, try to have to solve together the point about let's say, the data. These are the key points I bring with me.
Sorry, yeah, I was on mute. Maybe Rafael, I was saying, if you can go ahead.
Certainly. No, it was a very interesting conversation. I think it rebounds a bit to some of the previous ones we had also with bank representatives. I will simply conclude just to remind that it is a very key piece of regulation, the EBA ITS, and we will certainly, as I mentioned before, follow up on that. So I think almost all the banks have started publishing, their Pillar 3 disclosures on ESG risk. Not all of them. So for the ones that are missing, of course, we're eagerly waiting for those disclosures, and we'll be happy to follow up on that in the second part of the year, and also to exchange with the bank specifically on that, knowing that, as a reminder, it's also in the CRR. So it's very important to comply. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe Lucille and then Pilar.
I was also quite happy to have this discussion, and the fact that we have been covering on a transversal basis several topics of great importance for the EU banking sector. I regret we have not talked enough about the revision of the prudential package because there are many things to discuss, positive aspect, but also aspect with potential unintended consequences on bank ability to finance the transition, but I hope it could be for another session.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lucille and Pilar.
This discussion has been very, very helpful, as other discussions that we have had with banks, and particularly happy to see how banks are doing all the efforts that they can, even including in the bilateral contact for the BTAR that you have mentioned, and that I hope that will help to improve the quality or the comparability of the disclosures over the time. Also very helpful to understand, for example, what we need to do in the next revisions of the Pillar 3, the point of the transition plans. We try to capture something similar when we developed the Pillar 3 ATS, but the debate or discussions on the transition plans were not on the table at that moment. But this is something that we will take into account in the future. And as I said before, this has been a first step, and we really hope that this will improve over the time, and that is helping banks to improve their data availability and their management of risks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. So now we turn to the Q&A, and I think, you know, I saw, Pilar, you were writing to some question, I believe, on the EPCs, but the first question is also to you, I think, is on the Pillar 3 taxonomy disclosures connections, and, you know, what are the different assessment methods to determine taxonomy alignment of exposures? Can you see it in the chat, or?
Yes,
Yeah,
I can
okay.
see the first question on the different approaches.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not sure because I don't think we are following these different approaches. So, first, in the instructions of the Pillar 3 ATS, we say that the green asset ratio should be calculated on the, should follow the delegated act for the calculation of the green asset ratio. Then on the residential mortgage exposures and car loans exposures, we point out that the same sections of the Annex 1 of the Taxonomy Delegated Act, so the activity screening criteria for activities 7.2 to section 7.2 to section 7.7 in the case of the mortgages, and also the same screening criteria for the car loans. I think that, and maybe this is where the question comes from, where we are proposing a simplified approach is in the case of the BTAR, and for the calculation of the taxonomy alignment of the exposures towards corporates that are not subject to NFRD disclosure obligations. It's here where we are proposing a simplified approach. As a reminder, the Commission left out of the numerator of the green asset ratio all exposures towards SMEs and other non-NFRD corporates, while leaving them in the denominator. From us, from the point of view of the Pillar 3 ATS, this was something that we needed to address, and this is why we included the banking book taxonomy alignment ratio. And what we are proposing is that for those corporates that are not required to make disclosures under Article 8, institutions must collect the information on a bilateral basis in the context of the loan origination and monitoring process, or using estimates based on a simplified approach that should consider the main activity of the counterparty, or in the case of the real estate exposures, the EPC label of the collateral for the environmental objective of climate change mitigation, taking the taxonomy criteria in the related act. But this is only for the BTAR, so which is not in the taxonomy in the Commission delegated act, so there should not be any misalignment.
Thank you, Pilar. And I think, you know, in terms of the templates, they look the same. I think the only element is this GAR sector information that is just in the Article 8 delegated act, but not in the templates. But it makes sense because, I mean, I think the template one covers some of those issues as well. But let's not enter into that. Thank you for this. I see as well that Benjamin was asking if you could disclose what external data provider did you use for EPCs, and I think this was for Paolo.
Let's say on these, I think that this depends a lot from the different geography, because there is not a solution on all the geography. So in some countries, there are already public information quite easy to be retrieved. At least I have understood that this is the situation, for example, in Spain. This is not in Italy. In Italy, we have found, in a provider that is Revaluta, that is a strong connection with real estate company, and so they have direct access to data also in the selling part. So because it's connected to immobiliare.it, but these are very different from country to country. So on the single countries, what we have done is to make a really deep dive to find the best source of the data, when possible granular, when not possible through sound proxy and modeling. But let's say the problem of modeling is the fact that then you are not able to see the improvement along the time. So it's also a problem because let's say the point is I am already concerned about the commitment about the net zero. There we have to move in some way a portfolio that is quite stable by itself, because it's sticky, a mortgage portfolio. And here, let's say, availability of public data promptly uploaded, also considering renovation, would be key in some way in really monitoring the improvement of the portfolio.
Thank you, Paolo. I think that indeed makes sense, and hopefully, this is something that also has come up, I believe, in other regulatory discussions in terms of how to open up these EPC registers, and we have heard as well, that now we're having this European single access point, and there's also the Green Deal data architecture that is surrounding all of these issues that may help at some point, but they are not ready at this stage. So for now, it's indeed a complicated process, but maybe open up in the future. Okay, I see. Are there further developments expected in regards to Pillar 3 disclosures, like extending the scope, new templates? I don't know if Pilar, if it is something that at this stage may be early, but could be thought in the future.
The ITS on Pillar 3 for
Yes.
small. So I mean, so we are starting working on this. We need, of course, to wait until the CRR3 negotiations are closed, but we need to. We will. If the CRR3, which we expect, because I think that both the Parliament, Commission, and Council version include the same requirement, and also the mandate for us. All sorts of banks will need to disclose information on ESG risks once the CRR3 starts to apply. And we need to develop the technical standard and extend it to small and non-complex institutions on a proportionate way, in a proportionate manner. So this means that we are kicking off the work now, but we will start from the templates that are applicable to large institutions and extend to the rest in a proportionate manner, meaning that, of course, not all the templates will be required to SNCIs. We will have to see which parts of the information will have to be disclosed by them. But this is included in the level 1 text, and we would extend it in a proportionate way, the technical standard for the rest of the institutions.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think, yeah, that covers as well for the smaller institutions. I think that's important to understand. I think this proportionality element is also reflected, for example, if you go from large corporates to SMEs, large financial institutions to smaller ones. So I see here, Luisa, I think it's a question from, it's as well for Pilar, even though connected to what Lucille was indicating on the net zero 2050 scenario, related benchmark for the template 3. So some recommendations to overcome the gap. Pilar, I don't know if you...
Yes, Akim, I mean, here I would ask also Rafael, because I think
exactly.
that, yes, to help with this question, yes, if we understand that there are some sectors for which there is no alignment metrics, but I would kindly ask Rafael if he could take over this question.
No, obviously. So as a reminder, the choice of sector is left to the bank. It's also true that the net zero scenarios by IEA are reset on a regular basis. That was also the idea, that this is a moving target. I understand that the way they define the sectors is also evolutive in time. I mean, obviously, the starting point is changing, so that's why you have those updates. So therefore, I would really recommend to focus on the most meaningful and material sectors for each of the bank to start with until there is more information to be disclosed. As for the rest, I know that there's let's call a mismatch. I'm not exactly sure that we call it like this. We say it's like additional intermediary steps, so to say, in the way you define the targets. So we have observed that at least for banks, that committed to NZBA, sometimes the intermediary targets are with 25, sometimes 2030, sometimes directly 2030. So you have a high variety. It's true that the BITS template 3, provides intermediary milestones as well, which are obviously, in between those significant milestones that are obviously 2030 and 2050. There will be more discussion on the technical level to see exactly how this will be performed until next year. But again, reminder: so you have different metrics, you have different sectors, you have a very large choice within that spectrum, and we are sure that we will manage a way to disclose those significant and meaningful metrics.
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, Pilar. Indeed, I mean, I think these elements are of course complex, and you know, time will tell as well how we're able to adapt also from the banking side. Okay, so I see a question on so the non-EU counterparties and the relationship with the BTAR for SMEs and non-NFRD entities. So maybe before, you know, I just wanted to say probably that in this case, this is something more related to also what is going to be happening on the taxonomy side. As you may know, there's a revision of the Article 8 coming at some point next year. So the Article 8 Delegated Act that is going to showcase if and how the inclusion of SMEs and other entities should be done in the EU taxonomy, which would already, for example, go beyond the BTAR, because these kind of institutions would be included in the denominator of the calculation of the green asset ratio. So a BTAR would probably be there to complement for the rest of the entities that would not be covered under the mandatory disclosures of the EU taxonomy. But of course, this is again a problem of proportionality of how do you treat the SMEs, and this is a big issue that we're discussing in the EU platform on sustainable finance in terms of, okay, what are the next steps for SMEs and non-EU counterparties that may need to be covered at some point. In terms of the data collection, indeed, that's the complexity, and I believe as well in the prior drafts that were published, I believe on the Pillar 3 ATS and the other elements of how to collect some of this data, there was the issue as well of the main activity of the SMEs, how these connections were happening, that I think at this stage, of course, this has been taken out, and it's the complexity. Well, if you have use of proceeds transactions, it may be easier to extract some data. And then the other question is a question of interoperability. How do you connect requirements in one country with requirements in the other? But yeah, I don't know if Pilar, if you want to comment on this on the BTAR, but I think this is the overall status of how the taxonomy will look like in the future. But the BTAR for now, I think, is bridging a gap, no?
Indeed, I mean, I see some of the comments in the chat, particularly from Kwasi Afum, whether I understand the whole work that the BTAR will represent for banks. I mean, I have here one comment first. I mean, I understand that some banks have a big part of their balance sheet on SMEs, and I understand that it would not be the correct decision to leave these counterparties out of their risk management. We're talking about climate change. So I understand, and I hope, and I'm looking also at Rafael, as supervisor, that this is not the case. I mean, even if we understand of the challenges of collecting data from SMEs, particularly non-listed SMEs are left out of the TSRD. I mean, it would be difficult to understand that those banks where the SMEs business is a big part of their business are leaving out this important part of their balance sheet out of their risk management. In terms of disclosures of the BTAR, I think that we have a paragraph where we say where institutions are unable to collect on a bilateral basis or estimate relevant information or are unable to do it in a rational way that is not overburdensome for them or their counterparties, they shall explain this, the reason why they are leaving this out. So we hope that this would address these concerns. And there are also some questions of whether the simplified approach applies only for the BTAR or also for the car loans. I mean, the simplified, specifically we are mentioning the simplified approach on the BTAR. For the car loans, we understand that, to residential, to real retail counterparties, the assessment cannot be as in depth, they do no significant harm as other counterparties. So I think that I don't think here we are misaligned with the taxonomy regulation, because we are referring to the same activity, but we are underlining that it should be based on the certificate, the APC certificate, but the label of the car, but also following what the banks do under Article 8. I don't think that we expect banks to disclose something different here under Article 8. Actually, there is the possibility under the CSRD reports to cross-refer to Pillar 3, at least in what EFRAG submitted to the Commission when the information is the same. So we don't expect to have different information in Article 8 and the Pillar 3. The beta is not in Article 8, the part relating to non-FRD corporates. So here the information will be different because it will not exist in the NFRD, in the Article 8 disclosures.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pilar. I think that covers very well the key points, and I'm sure the regulators are doing the best to really understand, how everything is happening in the market and trying to see how different elements move. But of course, the mandate is there. And then I think the last question, I think we can combine it, is one from Christina and Annika that is about the simplified approach and some clarifications on that front, both from the household car loans and BTR.
On the simplified approach I mentioned at the end, so everything should be the same in Article 8 and Pillar 3. And I think that we are referring to the same sections in the Annex 1 of the taxonomy regulation. And that when coming to the simplified approach, I think that we are referring that to aspects like maybe it's not necessary to go car loan by car loan, but if there is some information relative to the same type of cars, this could be used. And I think that, we have also regular meetings with auditors to discuss questions that may come in the implementation of Article 8 disclosures. And I think that they are addressing also this type of questions. So probably the auditors would be able also to give you some advice on this regard. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we are perfectly on time. So unless there's any last question, speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay. So thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining, both speakers and audience. And just to say that for the next webinars, for now we have nothing planned, but after summer we may come with more, probably CSDDD and other issues that are relevant for the framework. So thank you, and hope you enjoyed. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.